The sound of his wife's voice, carried on the cool evening air, should have been a comfort. It was, after all, a voice he had loved for 7 years, a voice that had once whispered promises of forever in the quiet dark. But tonight, filtered through the pristine glass of the patio door, it was a shard of ice pressed against his heart. Liam stood in the manicured side garden of his in-laws' opulent home, his hand frozen on the handle. He had been about to step inside, to rejoin the family gathering, his old leather portfolio tucked under his arm. Inside, laughter mingled with the clinking of wine glasses. Sarah was speaking to her mother Carol and her brother Mark. Her tone was one of weary confession, the kind shared between allies in a long, tiresome war. "I just don't know how much more of this I can take, Mom," Sarah said, her voice a low murmur that still managed to cut through the ambient noise. "Dad is just relentless with him." "Your father only wants what's best for you, darling," Carol replied, her voice smooth and placating. "He sees your potential and he sees Liam." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken agreement. Then Mark, ever the opportunist for a cruel joke, chimed in. "Come on, Sarah. You knew what you were getting into. The quiet, brooding artist type. All passion, no profit." Liam's knuckles were white where he gripped the worn leather of his portfolio. Inside it were not just drawings, but entire worlds. Buildings that reached for the sky, homes that breathed with the families inside them. Inside it was the culmination of a decade of silent, relentless work. To them it was a prop, a symbol of his quaint, unprofitable hobby. Then came the words. The final, devastating blow, delivered by the woman he had vowed to cherish. Sarah sighed, a long, theatrical exhalation of despair. "I know, I was young. I thought it was romantic, but the romance fades, and you're left with the reality. He's the mistake I settled for." The mistake I settled for. The sentence did not explode in his mind. It landed. Simple, devastating, final. It was a quiet bomb that vaporized the entire landscape of his marriage, leaving behind a silent, smoking crater where his love had been. The birdsong in the garden seemed to cease. The scent of blooming roses turned acrid. For a moment, Liam couldn't breathe. He felt the sting not of anger, but of a profound, hollow sadness. He had given this woman his loyalty, his quiet support, his unwavering belief in her. And in return, he had become a line item in her ledger of life's disappointments, an error to be lamented over expensive wine. He looked down at the portfolio. The leather was scuffed and softened with age, the corners rounded from years of being carried from site to office to home. It looked humble, unassuming, just like him. They thought they knew him. They saw a quiet architect who struggled to make ends meet, who drove a sensible car, who lived in a modest apartment while Sarah's family inhabited a world of sprawling estates and corporate dominance. They saw the man on the surface, the one he allowed them to see. They had no idea what was hidden beneath. They had no idea what was contained within the worn leather of the portfolio he held. And in that moment, a cold, clear certainty settled over him. They would. Soon, they would all know. We've all felt underestimated at some point in our lives, haven't we? That sting of being judged on appearances, of having our worth measured by the wrong ruler. If you've ever been in that position, I know you'll understand the journey Liam is about to take. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, as we love to see how far our stories travel. And if you enjoy watching arrogance meet its match, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of quiet strength and ultimate vindication. Now, let's get back to Liam, as he takes a deep breath and prepares to walk back into the lion's den. Liam's fingers relaxed their grip on the handle. He took one slow, deliberate breath, pulling the cool evening air deep into his lungs. He did not wipe the single, treacherous tear that traced a path down his cheek. He let it fall. It was a final goodbye to the man he had been in this marriage, the patient, ever-hopeful husband. A new man was taking his place. one who was still patient, but whose hope had been replaced by a steely, unbending purpose. He smoothed his simple jacket, adjusted the portfolio under his arm, and composed his features into a mask of placid neutrality. He slid the glass door open. The sudden burst of conversation and warmth washed over him. 3 pairs of eyes swiveled in his direction. Carol, his mother-in-law, offered a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. Mark gave him a lazy, dismissive nod. And Sarah looked at him with an expression of mild annoyance, as if his very presence was an inconvenience she was forced to endure. "There you are," she said, her tone clipped. "I was wondering where you disappeared to. Dad's about to open another bottle of that Bordeaux you can't afford." The insult was delivered with the casual ease of long practice. It was designed to remind him of his place, to put him on the defensive. It used to work. It used to send a flush of shame creeping up his neck. Tonight it did nothing. It was like a dart thrown at a granite wall. Liam offered a small, serene smile. "Just taking a moment. The roses in your mother's garden are beautiful this year." Carol preened. "Of course they are. I have the best landscaper in the state. Costs a fortune, but you get what you pay for." Another barb, another reminder of the world of wealth he didn't inhabit. He walked over to the small bar and poured himself a glass of water, his movements unhurried. He could feel their collective gaze on his back, a weight of judgment he had carried for years. He turned, leaning against the polished mahogany, and took a slow sip. Richard Preston, his father-in-law, entered the room from his study, a large, bull-chested man whose presence seemed to suck the oxygen from the air. He was the patriarch, the titan of industry, the founder of Preston Holdings, a regional property development giant. He saw Liam, and a familiar look of disdain crossed his features. "Liam," he boomed, his voice a gravelly assertion of dominance. "Still clutching that little book of drawings, I see. When are you going to give up that hobby and get a real job? I could always find a spot for you in accounts payable. At least then you'd be handling real money, not just drawing pictures of it." The room fell silent, waiting for Liam's reaction. This was the ritual, the public humiliation. Richard would land the blow, Mark would snicker, Carol would look on with detached pity, and Sarah would look away, her silence a profound act of betrayal. It was a performance they had perfected. But tonight the script changed. Liam didn't flinch. He didn't look down at his shoes. He met Richard's gaze directly, his own eyes calm and clear. "Thank you for the offer, Richard," he said, his voice even and measured. "But I'm quite content where I am." Richard was taken aback. He was used to a flustered, stammering response. This quiet confidence was new. It was unnerving. He narrowed his eyes, searching for the weakness he was so used to exploiting. Content? Content with what? Scrabbling for renovation contracts? Designing patios for dentists? A man with a family to think about should have ambition. He gestured around the room, at the silk wallpaper, the antique furniture, the priceless art. "This is ambition, son. This is what it looks like to build something that matters." Liam's gaze followed Richard's gesture, but he wasn't seeing the wealth. He was seeing the architecture of the room, the poorly proportioned archways, the gaudy crown molding, the complete lack of harmony. It was a house built with money, not with vision. It was a monument to ego. "There are different ways to build things, Richard," Liam said softly. The statement hung in the air, a quiet challenge to the entire Preston worldview. Sarah, sensing a shift in the power dynamic she couldn't comprehend, grew agitated. "Dad, leave him alone," she said, not in defense of Liam, but in an attempt to restore the familiar order. "Let's just have a nice evening." "I'm just trying to talk some sense into him," Richard retorted, his voice rising. "You deserve a husband who can provide for you properly, not one who spends his days doodling in a notebook." Liam pushed himself off the bar, the portfolio held firmly at his side. He walked toward the center of the room, his quiet movement drawing all their attention. He looked at each of them in turn, at Richard's blustering arrogance, at Carol's cold condescension, at Mark's smug cruelty. And finally, he looked at his wife. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the flicker of shame warring with a desperate need for her family's approval. He saw the woman who had just called him the mistake she had settled for. "My doodles, as you call them, provide for us perfectly well, Richard," Liam stated, his voice devoid of heat. "We have a home. We have food. We have everything we need." "Need?" Mark scoffed from his armchair. "You call that shoebox apartment everything you need? My walk-in closet is bigger than your living room." Liam's smile didn't waver. "And yet, how much time do you spend in your closet, Mark? A home isn't about square footage. It's about the life you build inside it." He turned his gaze back to Sarah. "Or so I thought." The subtext was clear. He was no longer just defending his profession. He was questioning the very foundation of their life together. Sarah flushed, a deep, blotchy red. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. She was adrift, the familiar script abandoned, and she didn't know her lines. Richard, however, saw it only as defiance. "Don't you get philosophical with me, boy. I deal in concrete and steel, in profit and loss, and from where I'm standing, you're a net loss." Liam gave a single, slow nod. He absorbed the insult, cataloged it, and stored it away with the others. The collection was nearly complete. He knew this evening was just another scene in a long-running play, but he also knew the final act was approaching, an act he alone had written. "Well," Liam said, his voice still unnervingly calm, "I wouldn't want to be a net loss at your dinner table." He placed his untouched glass of water down. "Sarah, I think I'll head home. I have an early morning." Before anyone could protest, he turned and walked out, the patio door sliding shut behind him with a soft click. He didn't look back. He left them in a state of stunned, confused silence. They had expected a retreat, a surrender. They had gotten something else entirely, a quiet, dignified withdrawal that felt, somehow, like a victory. As Liam walked to his modest car, the weight of their judgment felt lighter than it had in years. It was being replaced by the solid, reassuring weight of the portfolio under his arm, and the plan that was now irrevocably in motion. The mistake they thought they knew was about to show them the true cost of their error. The weeks that followed settled into a new, strange rhythm. On the surface, nothing had changed. Liam and Sarah continued to inhabit the same apartment, a space that now felt charged with unspoken words. They moved around each other like polite strangers, their conversations limited to household logistics. "I'll be working late tonight. We're out of milk. Your mother called." The easy intimacy they had once shared was gone, replaced by a careful, brittle courtesy. Sarah seemed content to exist in this limbo, perhaps believing that if she ignored the chasm that had opened between them, it might simply disappear. She didn't ask about his late nights. She didn't ask why he now spent his weekends locked in his small home office. She didn't notice the quiet intensity that had settled deep in his eyes. She saw only what she wanted to see, the same unassuming husband, the same manageable disappointment. But away from her sight, Liam's world was anything but unassuming. His office was not the small, struggling one-man operation the Prestons imagined. It was a discreet, minimalist studio in a converted warehouse downtown, the unmarked door giving no hint of the powerhouse within. This was the headquarters of Ethelred Designs. The name was a nod to his passion for history and enduring structures, a name that spoke of legacy and substance. Inside, a team of 10 brilliant young architects and designers worked, their energy and creativity fueling a firm that had, in just 5 years, become one of the most respected boutique architectural practices in the country. They didn't chase volume, they chased vision. They had won national awards for a museum design in Chicago, a sustainable library in Portland, and a breathtaking private residence cantilevered over a cliff in Big Sur. Their clients were discerning, wealthy individuals and institutions who sought art, not just buildings. Liam had cultivated this success quietly, deliberately keeping his name out of the flashy trade magazines his father-in-law devoured. He valued the work, not the notoriety. His wealth was substantial, managed by a discreet financial advisor, and it grew with each completed project. The modest apartment, the sensible car, they weren't necessities, they were choices. Choices that allowed him to live a life free from the suffocating materialism that defined the Preston family. He had tried to share this world with Sarah, to explain that his fulfillment came from creating, not from acquiring. She had smiled and nodded, but he now understood she had never truly listened. His team was currently consumed by a single, all-encompassing project, codenamed the Phoenix. It was a proposal for the largest urban renewal initiative the city had seen in a century, the redevelopment of the derelict South Side waterfront. It was a blighted, forgotten industrial zone, and the city was holding a blind competition, seeking a visionary master plan that would transform it into a vibrant, mixed-use community. For Liam, this was more than a contract. It was a legacy. It was the culmination of everything he believed about architecture, that it could heal, inspire, and build community. He and his team had been working on it for over a year, pouring thousands of hours into econometric models, environmental impact studies, and breathtakingly innovative designs. The drawings in his worn leather portfolio were not just pictures, they were the blueprint for a city's future. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah's phone rang. It was her mother. Liam, working at the dining table, could hear Carol's excited, shrill voice through the receiver. He didn't need to listen closely to know what it was about. Richard was making his move. Sarah hung up, her face flushed with excitement. "That was Mom. You won't believe it. Dad's company, Preston Holdings, just announced they're officially bidding for the Southside Waterfront project. They're calling it the Waterfront Gateway. Isn't that amazing?" Liam looked up from his schematics, his expression unreadable. "It's an ambitious project," he said neutrally. "Ambitious? It's city-defining," she gushed, her eyes shining with reflected glory. "Dad is going to be the man who rebuilds the waterfront. Can you imagine? The galas, the press conferences. He's even holding a press event at the country club next week to unveil their concept." She paused, a new idea taking root. "You know, he could probably use your help." Liam felt a familiar coldness seep into his chest. "My help?" "Yes, you know, with the drawings. You're good at that sort of thing. You could do some renderings for his presentation, make it look professional. It would be a great way for you to get involved, to show him you're a team player. It would mean so much to me, Liam, to us." There it was again, the casual dismissal of his entire profession reduced to a helpful hobby. The assumption that his time and talent were resources to be deployed for her father's benefit. And the use of the word us, a word that now felt like a weapon, designed to guilt him into compliance. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw a woman completely blinded by the gleam of her father's ambition. She didn't see the conflict of interest. She didn't see the disrespect. She only saw an opportunity to finally bridge the gap between the man she married and the family she idolized. A bridge built entirely on his submission. "Sarah," he began, choosing his words with surgical precision. "My firm is quite busy at the moment. I don't have the bandwidth to take on freelance work." Her face fell, the excitement draining away to be replaced by a familiar frustration. "Freelance work? This is my father, Liam. This is family. Why do you always have to be so difficult? Why can't you just support him? Support me?" "Support is a two-way street," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Has he ever once offered to support my career? Has he ever asked to see my work, not to mock it, but to understand it?" "That's not fair," she retorted, her voice rising. "He's from a different world. He shows his support by offering you a real job. He's trying to help you. You're just too proud to see it." Too proud. Liam almost laughed. It wasn't pride that stopped him. It was integrity. and it was the secret knowledge that his own firm, Aethelred Designs, was the leading contender in the very same competition. His proposal, the Phoenix, was already being lauded in confidential city planning circles as revolutionary. Richard wasn't just a competitor, he was the Goliath to Liam's David, and he had no idea David was armed with a weapon of unimaginable power. "I'm sorry, Sarah, I can't help him," Liam said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He stood up, gathering his papers. The dining table felt too small, the air too thick. "I have to get back to the office." He retreated to his study, the small room that had become his sanctuary. He closed the door on her angry, sputtering protests. He sat at his desk and looked at the master plan for the Phoenix pinned to the wall. It was a vision of green spaces, elegant towers that didn't block the sun, public art, and affordable housing integrated seamlessly with luxury condos. It was a project for people. He then pulled up an industry news site on his computer. A press release from Preston Holdings was the top story. It featured a rendering of their waterfront gateway. It was exactly what he expected, a soulless, monolithic block of concrete and glass, designed to maximize profit at the expense of human experience. It was arrogant, ugly, and cheap. It was Richard Preston in architectural form, and Liam knew with absolute certainty that it would fail. Richard was about to stake his company's reputation and a massive amount of capital on a losing bid, and the man who would defeat him was the son-in-law he so openly despised. The trap wasn't just set. Richard was walking into it, whistling a tune of his own self-importance, and Sarah was cheering him on. The following weeks saw Richard Preston's campaign for the Waterfront Gateway project shift into overdrive. His face was plastered on the business pages of the local paper, always with a hard hat perched jauntily on his head, pointing at some unseen future. He gave interviews from his lavish office, Preston Holdings emblazoned on the wall behind him, speaking in grand terms about his vision and giving back to the city. He was a master of self-promotion, and the media, enamored with his story of homegrown success, ate it up. He hosted a lavish gala at the country club to unveil the full scope of his proposal, an event Sarah insisted she and Liam attend. It was an exercise in calculated humiliation. Liam stood in a tuxedo that felt like a costume, a glass of champagne in his hand, as person after person came to congratulate Richard. His father-in-law was in his element, basking in the glow of adoration. When he saw Liam, he strode over, a shark sensing blood in the water. "Well, look at you," Richard boomed, clapping Liam on the shoulder with enough force to make him stumble. "All dressed up with nowhere to go. See, son, this is what real success looks like. Not hiding in some dusty office. It's about making things happen." He gestured to a large, glossy rendering of his waterfront gateway project. "What do you think? A bit bigger than the back porches you're used to, eh?" Liam looked at the rendering. It was even worse up close. A collection of generic, imposing towers that cast long, dark shadows over the paltry sliver of green space allotted for the public. It was a fortress of wealth, designed to wall off the rich from the rest of the city. "It's certainly large," Liam said, his voice a study in neutrality. Richard laughed, a loud, barking sound. "Damn right it's large. It's going to make a fortune, and it's going to put the Preston name on the map for good." Throughout the evening, Sarah clung to her father's arm, her eyes shining with pride. She played the part of the devoted daughter perfectly. When she was with Liam, however, a cold distance remained. She was angry with him for his refusal to help, seeing it as a personal betrayal. "I don't understand you, Liam," she whispered fiercely at one point, when they were momentarily alone. "This is a chance for our family to achieve something incredible, and you're acting like a sullen child. People are starting to notice. My father's partners have been asking why my husband, the architect, isn't involved." "And what do you tell them?" Liam asked, genuinely curious. "I make excuses for you. I say you're busy with your own small projects. I have to cover for you, to protect you from looking like a failure." The words, meant to wound him, barely registered. He was playing a much longer game. He knew something that Richard, in all his blustering confidence, did not. The city's selection committee for the waterfront project was headed by a panel of independent experts, including some of the most respected names in international architecture and urban planning. They were impervious to local politics and backroom deals. Richard thought he could win with bluster and influence. Liam knew the only thing that mattered was the quality of the design itself. Richard was fighting a public relations war, while Liam was focused on winning the actual battle. Unbeknownst to the Prestons, Liam's Phoenix project had passed through 2 rounds of anonymous review with flying colors. His file was known only by a number, 734. The feedback from the committee was glowing. They called proposal number 734 visionary, profoundly humane, and a new paradigm for urban living. Liam was now in the final round, one of 3 contenders. One of the other finalists was a prestigious firm from New York. The third was Preston Holdings. Richard, however, was supremely confident. He'd heard rumors that a New York firm was in the running, but he dismissed them as coastal elites who didn't understand the city's fabric. He had no idea there was a third, local contender, a silent player moving with devastating precision right under his nose. He believed it was a 2-horse race, and that his local connections and aggressive lobbying would carry the day. The pressure from Sarah intensified. "Dad's hit a snag with some of the zoning variances," she told Liam one night, her voice tight with anxiety. "He needs to present some alternative designs to the city planning board next week. He's willing to pay you, Liam. He'll pay you very well to just sketch out a few options for him, just to have them in his back pocket." This was the moment of truth, the moment of temptation. He could take Richard's money. He could create a few mediocre, passable designs for him, knowing they would be nothing compared to his own masterpiece. It would be a small act of sabotage, a way to ensure Richard's failure while profiting from it. The thought was seductive. It was the kind of petty revenge the old Liam, the hurt and humiliated Liam, might have considered. But as he looked at the elegant lines of his own design on his computer screen, he knew he couldn't do it. His victory had to be clean. It couldn't be tainted by deceit. His goal was not to destroy Richard, but to reveal the truth of his own worth, and the truth of their shallow, materialistic world. His vindication would come not from a secret act of sabotage, but from an undeniable public triumph. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle but resolute, "I cannot, in good conscience, work for a firm whose architectural philosophy is so fundamentally opposed to my own. It's not about money. It's not about pride. It's about integrity. My answer is no." Her reaction was explosive. "Integrity? Don't you talk to me about integrity. My family is on the verge of the biggest success of their lives, and you refuse to lift a finger. You're not a man of integrity, Liam. You're a selfish, jealous man who can't stand to see anyone else succeed." She stormed out of the room, slamming the bedroom door behind her. The sound echoed in the quiet apartment. Liam didn't follow her. He sat there in the silence, the weight of her accusation settling on him. Jealous? It was so far from the truth it was almost laughable. He felt a sense of pity for her. She was so thoroughly indoctrinated into her father's worldview that she couldn't conceive of a success that wasn't measured in dollars and headlines. She couldn't see the quiet, profound success he had already built. He turned back to his screen, to the beautiful, intricate world of the Phoenix Project. He made a final adjustment to the lighting on a rendering of the Central Plaza, a space designed to encourage community, filled with fountains and trees and public art. He was building a world based on connection, on humanity, on light. Richard was building a monument to greed. The city would make its choice, and Liam was content to let his work speak for itself. The trap was fully set. All he had to do now was wait for the spring. The final decision from the city's selection committee was due on a Thursday. Richard, in a display of supreme and ultimately foolish arrogance, had decided to treat it as a foregone conclusion. He had booked the most exclusive private dining room in the city at a restaurant called The Pinnacle for what he was calling his victory dinner. The Pinnacle sat on the top floor of the city's tallest skyscraper, offering breathtaking panoramic views of the very skyline he intended to dominate. He had invited his closest business partners, his financial backers, Carol, Mark, and, in a final act of condescending magnanimity, Sarah and Liam. The invitation had been delivered via Sarah, who presented it to Liam with a tense, expectant air. "Dad wants us there. Thursday night. The announcement is made at 4 p.m. and the dinner is at 7. It's to celebrate." "To celebrate the win?" Liam asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Of course, to celebrate the win," she snapped. "What else would it be for? He's certain he has it. All his sources say it's his." Liam knew Richard's sources were nothing but sycophants and low-level City Hall employees with no access to the sequestered selection committee. His own source was a quiet, encrypted email from the committee's administrator, confirming that finalist number 734 was still under active and enthusiastic consideration. "We'll be there," Liam said simply. The days leading up to Thursday were thick with a strange, electric tension. At the Ethelred Design Studio, the mood was one of quiet, nervous excitement. The team knew they had submitted the work of their lives. They had done everything they could. Now it was out of their hands. Liam projected an aura of absolute calm, which in turn steadied his team. He trusted the process. He trusted his work. At home, the silence between him and Sarah was heavier than ever. It was the quiet of a deep-sea trench, filled with immense, unspoken pressure. She was entirely caught up in the whirlwind of her father's anticipated triumph, speaking of it in terms of when, not if. She talked about the new wing they would fund at the art museum, the society galas Carol would now chair, the promotion Mark would get within the company. It was a future she had painted in vivid detail, a future in which Liam was, at best, a background character. On Thursday afternoon, at precisely 4 p.m., an official press release would be sent out by the mayor's office. Liam was in his studio, surrounded by his team. He had his laptop open, his finger hovering over the refresh button on the city's official website. He had instructed his team not to look, not to check their phones. He wanted them to hear it from him. The silence in the studio was absolute. The only sound was the hum of the servers and the distant city traffic. At 4:01 p.m., Liam clicked refresh. The page reloaded. A new headline appeared in bold letters. "City announces Ethelred Designs as winner of waterfront redevelopment contract with visionary Phoenix Project." A slow smile spread across Liam's face. He looked up at the anxious faces of his team. He didn't shout. He didn't pump his fist. He simply said in a quiet, steady voice, "We did it." The room erupted. Cheers, applause, hugs. The culmination of a year of relentless effort exploded in a joyous catharsis. Champagne bottles that had been chilling for a week were popped, the corks hitting the high industrial ceiling. Liam accepted the congratulations, his heart swelling with pride not for himself, but for the brilliant young minds who had poured their souls into this work alongside him. An hour later, his phone buzzed. It was Sarah. Her voice was ecstatic. "Have you heard? We got it. Dad just got the call. We got the project." Liam's blood ran cold. "What?" "I know, he's screaming. Mom is crying. It's incredible." Someone on the inside gave him a heads up just before the announcement went public. Said the committee loved the Preston name. "I have to go, we're all celebrating. See you at the Pinnacle at 7. Don't be late. Tonight is the first night of the rest of our lives." She hung up before he could say a word. Liam stood there, phone in hand, a dawning, terrible understanding washing over him. Richard hadn't gotten the call. Someone had lied to him. Someone, either as a cruel prank or a misguided attempt to curry favor, had fed him false information in the minutes before the real announcement, and Richard, in his boundless arrogance, had believed it without question. He was heading to his own victory party, completely unaware that he had not won. He was walking into a public celebration of his own defeat, and he had invited his partners, his backers, and the very man who had vanquished him to witness it. Liam looked down at his old leather portfolio, which sat on his desk. It contained the final, presentation-quality renderings of the Phoenix Project. He had planned to bring it tonight, to choose his moment, to reveal his success on his own terms. Now the stage was set for something far more dramatic. It was no longer just a revelation. It would be a reckoning. He picked up the portfolio. His calm had returned, but now it was tinged with the cold, hard clarity of fate. He was no longer just an architect. He was an instrument of poetic justice. He walked out of his celebrating office, leaving his team to their party, and went home to get dressed. He had a dinner to attend. A dinner that no one at that table would ever forget. The pinnacle was everything its name suggested. An elevator with glass walls whisked them silently up 50 stories, the city lights spreading out below like a carpet of fallen stars. Sarah was practically vibrating with excitement, her hand gripping Liam's arm tightly. She was wearing a stunning, backless red dress, a victory color. She looked beautiful, and for a fleeting moment, Liam felt a pang of the old affection, a ghost of the man who had loved her. But the feeling vanished as soon as she spoke. "I hope you can be happy for him tonight, Liam. For me," she said, her voice a mix of plea and command. "No more of your moodiness. Tonight is about family. It's about success." "I will be exactly what the evening requires," Liam replied, his voice a low, placid rumble. The elevator doors opened into a private vestibule of hushed, expensive elegance. A maitre d' in a flawless tuxedo led them toward the Olympus room. The room was breathtaking. A single, long table, set for 12 with gleaming silver and crystal, ran parallel to a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a 180-degree view of the city. At the center of that view, shrouded in the darkness of the evening, lay the Southside waterfront. Richard stood at the head of the table, a veritable king holding court. His partners, two silver-haired men named Henderson and Croft, flanked him. Mark and Carol were there, their faces flushed with triumph. Everyone was laughing, champagne flutes held high. They were the picture of masters of the universe. "Ah, the happy couple arrives," Richard boomed as Liam and Sarah entered. "Sarah, my darling, you look like a goddess. And Liam, you brought your satchel." He gestured to the leather portfolio tucked under Liam's arm. "Hoping to get some notes from the big leagues?" The table chuckled obediently. Mark smirked into his glass. Liam simply smiled his serene, unnerving smile and took his seat beside Sarah. He placed the portfolio carefully on the floor beside his chair. It was a quiet promise, waiting to be fulfilled. The dinner began. Course after exquisite course was served, each paired with a rare and expensive wine. The conversation was loud, boisterous, and entirely centered on Richard. He recounted a heavily embellished version of his fight to win the project, painting himself as a lone warrior battling against incompetent city bureaucrats and out-of-touch coastal elites. His partners, Henderson and Croft, nodded along, adding their own sycophantic praise. "Never had a doubt, Richard," Henderson said, raising his glass. "Your tenacity is second to none." "The Preston name carries weight in this city," Croft added. "They were never going to give a project this important to an outsider." Liam ate his seared scallops in silence, watching the performance. It was mesmerizing in its delusion. These powerful, intelligent men were so caught up in their own narrative, so high on the fumes of their perceived success, that they hadn't even bothered to do the most basic due diligence, to read the official press release from the mayor's office. Their entire celebration was built on a foundation of rumor and ego. It was a house of cards, and Liam was holding the gust of wind that would bring it all down. Sarah, seated beside him, occasionally tried to draw him into the conversation. "Isn't it wonderful, Liam?" she'd whisper. He would simply nod, his eyes never leaving her father. Finally, the main course was cleared, and Richard stood, tapping his glass for attention. The room fell silent. This was the moment, the victory speech. "Friends, partners, family," he began, his chest puffed out. "Tonight we stand on the precipice of history. The Waterfront Gateway is more than a project. It's a legacy. It's a testament to what a man can build with vision, with grit, and with the courage to ignore the naysayers." His eyes swept the table and landed, inevitably, on Liam. "There will always be small men," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Men who are content to sit on the sidelines, to dream small dreams and draw their little pictures. Men who lack the stomach for the fight, who wouldn't know a real opportunity if it hit them in the face." He paused, letting the insult hang in the air. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat, a flicker of something, shame perhaps, crossing her face. "But we are not those men," Richard thundered, his voice rising to a crescendo. "We are builders, we are victors, and this project is our trophy. Maybe one day," he said, looking directly at Liam now, a cruel smirk on his face, "you'll be involved in something this big, son. Keep it those little drawings. You might get there eventually." He raised his glass. "To Preston Holdings, to the Waterfront Gateway, to victory!" The table erupted in a chorus of "To victory!" and "Hear, hear!" Glasses clinked. The celebration had reached its peak. The quiet before the storm was over. As the applause died down, Liam remained seated. He took a slow, deliberate sip of water. Then, in the echoing silence, he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the celebratory haze like a surgeon's scalpel. "Actually, Richard," he said calmly, "I do have something to say about the Waterfront Gateway project." Every head turned toward him. The mood shifted instantly from triumph to confusion. Richard lowered his glass, his expression darkening. "What did you say?" Liam reached down and lifted his portfolio, placing it on the table with a soft, definitive thud. "I said, I have something to say." He looked around the table, his gaze moving from one confused face to the next until it rested on Richard. "For 5 years," Liam began, his voice a low, steady cadence, "I have sat at your table. I have listened while you called my life's work a hobby. I have listened while you called my designs little drawings. I have listened to you describe me as a net loss and a failure. I have endured your son's jokes about my home and my car. I have watched your wife look at me with pity and your own daughter look at me with shame." He paused. The room was utterly still. This was not the fumbling, awkward Liam they knew. This was someone else, someone with a spine of steel. "You speak of victory," Liam continued, his voice gaining a quiet power. "You toast to success, but you seem to have a fundamental misunderstanding of what happened today." He unfastened the latches on his portfolio. The clicks echoed in the silent room. He pulled out a large, beautifully rendered drawing and unrolled it onto the table. It was a breathtaking aerial view of a waterfront alive with parks, graceful towers, and sparkling waterways. It was elegant, humane, and utterly brilliant. It was the Phoenix Project. "This," Liam said, his voice dropping to an almost whisper, "is the new Waterfront Gateway." Richard stared at the drawing, his face a mask of confusion. "What is this nonsense? That's not my design." "No," Liam agreed, "it's not." He looked directly at Richard, his eyes holding no malice, only a profound, unwavering certainty. "It's mine." The silence that followed was a physical thing, a crushing weight that pressed down on every person at the table. Richard stared at the plans, then at Liam, a dawning horror beginning to flicker in his eyes. He opened his mouth, but only a dry, croaking sound emerged. I don't understand," Henderson, one of the partners, stammered, looking from the plans to Liam's calm face. Liam didn't look away from his father-in-law. It's quite simple, really. You see, Richard, you didn't win the waterfront contract. The statement landed. Simple, devastating, final. That's a lie, Richard finally roared, his face turning a blotchy, apoplectic red. I got the call. My source confirmed it. Your source was wrong, Liam said flatly. Or they lied. The mayor's office issued a press release at 4:01 p.m. You were so busy planning your victory party, you never thought to actually read it. He slid his phone across the polished table. The screen lit up with the official city webpage. The headline was stark and undeniable. Mark snatched the phone. He read the headline, his smug expression dissolving into disbelief. It says, Aethelred Designs, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Aethelred Designs? Croft, the other partner, repeated, his voice sharp with alarm. Who the hell is Aethelred Designs? All eyes turned back to Liam. He gave a small, almost sad smile. That would be my firm, he said quietly. My architectural firm, the one I founded 5 years ago. The one you all thought was just me in a dusty little office, making little drawings. He let that sink in. He watched the gears turning in their minds, the frantic recalculations, the dawning comprehension of the sheer scale of their misjudgment. He saw the blood drain from Richard's face, leaving it a pale, doughy mask. He saw Carol's hand fly to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. He saw Mark staring at him as if he were a ghost. And he saw Sarah. Her face was a canvas of conflicting emotions. Shock, confusion, betrayal, and a tiny, horrifying flicker of awe. She was looking at her husband, the man she had called a mistake, as if for the very first time. You? She breathed, the word a wisp of sound. You won the project? We won the project, Liam corrected her gently. My team and I. We've been working on it for over a year. As if on cue, the maitre d' approached the table, his expression one of polite deference. Excuse me, Mr. Preston. There is a gentleman here who wishes to have a word. Mr. Alistair Finch. The name dropped into the room like a 10-ton weight. Alistair Finch was a legend. A semi-retired titan of architecture and urban planning, he was the revered, incorruptible head of the city's selection committee. He was a man Richard had been desperately trying to get a meeting with for months, to no avail. A moment later, an elegant, silver-haired man in his 70s, with eyes that radiated intelligence and authority, stepped into the room. He scanned the table, his gaze passing over the dumbstruck faces until it landed on Liam. A warm, genuine smile lit up his face. Liam, my boy, Finch said, his voice rich and sonorous. He walked directly to Liam, bypassing Richard completely, and clapped him on the shoulder. I was hoping I might find you here. My congratulations. Your Phoenix project is a masterpiece. A true city builder. The committee was unanimous. It's the most exciting proposal I've seen in 20 years. He either didn't notice or didn't care that he had just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of the dinner party. He was focused solely on Liam. Richard stood frozen at the head of the table, utterly and completely ignored. The man he had been courting for months was praising his despised son-in-law as a visionary. Thank you, Alistair, Liam said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. That means a great deal coming from you. Nonsense, the work speaks for itself, Finch said dismissively. He finally seemed to notice the others at the table, his eyes sweeping over them with a look of mild curiosity, as if they were part of the restaurant's decor. He gave a curt, formal nod. Preston. The single word delivered in a cool, dismissive tone was more devastating than any insult. It was a complete dismissal of Richard's status, his power, his very existence. In that one word, Alistair Finch had confirmed everything. Richard was a nobody. Liam was the visionary. Finch turned back to Liam. We'll have to have lunch next week. There are a few philanthropic investors tied to the project who are eager to meet the mind behind the design. He gave Liam's shoulder a final, congratulatory squeeze. A triumph, my boy. a true triumph. With another polite nod to the stunned table, Alistair Finch turned and was gone, leaving a silence that was deeper and more profound than before. The air was thick with the wreckage of Richard Preston's ego. The reversal of fortune was complete. The humiliated now held all the power. The arrogant were left with nothing but the bitter taste of ashes in their mouths. For a long moment, no one moved. The magnificent view of the city from the window seemed to be mocking them, a glittering testament to a world of success they had just been violently ejected from. The partners, Henderson and Croft, were staring at Richard, their expressions a cocktail of fury and panic. Their fawning praise had curdled into cold, hard assessment. They had backed the wrong horse, and they knew it. Richard finally collapsed back into his chair at the head of the table. The blustering, domineering patriarch was gone. In his place was a shrunken, pale old man, his eyes darting around the table as if looking for an escape. His gaze fell on Liam, and a desperate, craven light entered his eyes. "Liam, son," he began, his voice a hoarse, unfamiliar rasp. I had no idea. This is incredible." He forced a ghastly smile. "We should talk. A partnership. Preston Holdings and your firm. We could build this together. My company has the resources, the manpower. You have the design. It would be a perfect match." It was the plea of a drowning man, grabbing for any piece of driftwood. He was offering a partnership to the man he had tried to humiliate just minutes before. The irony was so thick, Liam could almost taste it. Liam looked at him, not with triumph, but with a kind of weary pity. He employed the moral mirror, holding it up for Richard to see his own reflection. "A partnership, Richard?" he asked, his voice still quiet, still calm. "A partnership requires a foundation of mutual respect. In 5 years, you have never once shown me a shred of it. You have mocked my work, insulted my ambition, and belittled me in front of my wife. Why would I partner with a man who sees me as a net loss? Why would I build my greatest achievement on a foundation of your contempt?" Each question was a stone dropped into a deep, still pond, the ripples spreading out to touch everyone at the table. Richard flinched as if he'd been struck. There was no defense. It was the simple, unvarnished truth. Henderson, the senior partner, saw his investment circling the drain. He turned on Richard, his voice cold with fury. "You told us you had this locked up, Richard. You told us you had the committee in your pocket. You made us look like fools. And all this time, the winning design was coming from your own son-in-law. And you were too arrogant to even see it?" I didn't know," Richard stammered, looking helplessly at his partners. "You didn't know because you didn't look," Croft snapped. "You were so sure of yourself, so dismissive of everyone else. You never even considered you could be beaten, especially not by him." He jabbed a finger toward Liam. The alliance that had propped up Richard's ego for years was crumbling in real time. His partners were turning on him. His empire was beginning to shake. Then Liam turned his attention to Sarah. She had been sitting in stunned silence, her face pale, her eyes wide and haunted. She looked from her father's pathetic, crumbling form to Liam's calm, powerful presence. The two pillars of her world had just switched places, and she was lost in the earthquake. "Liam," she whispered, her hand reaching out as if to touch his arm, but then hesitating, uncertain. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I had no idea." Liam looked at her, and all the pain of the last 7 years, all the quiet humiliations, all the silent betrayals coalesced in his gaze. This was the heart of it, the true reckoning. "Didn't know?" he asked, his voice soft but devastating. "Or didn't care to know? You heard my dreams, Sarah. For years I told you what I wanted to build. You just never believed in them. You never believed in me. It was easier to believe in your father's world of money and status." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "I heard you, Sarah, that night in the garden. I heard what you said to your mother. Her eyes widened in horror. The color drained completely from her face. She understood. "I was the mistake you settled for." He quoted her own words back to her, the phrase a quiet indictment. "I suppose a successful man would have been more convenient for you. But the thing is, you would have had to respect him from the start. And respect for who I was something you were never willing to give." He let the truth of it settle between them, a final, insurmountable wall. The beautiful red dress she wore now seemed garish, a costume for a celebration that had turned into a funeral. Liam stood up. The movement was fluid, final. He was no longer a guest at their table. He was his own man. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a crisp, white envelope. He placed it gently on the table in front of Sarah's untouched dessert plate. "These are divorce papers, Sarah," he said, his voice clear and steady for the whole table to hear. "I had my lawyer draw them up last week. I think it's clear our foundations are incompatible. My lawyer will be in touch with yours." He looked around the table one last time, at the wreckage he had wrought, not with anger or revenge, but with the simple, undeniable power of the truth. He had not sought to destroy them, only to be seen. And in seeing him, they had been forced to see themselves. Without another word, he picked up his portfolio, turned his back on the ruins of his marriage and the shattered egos of the Preston family, and walked out of the Olympus room. He didn't look back. The doors slid shut behind him, leaving them to the deafening silence and the cold, glittering view of a city that was now his to shape. The months that followed the dinner at the Pinnacle were a study in implosion. The consequences for the Preston family were not swift and cinematic, but slow, grinding, and absolute. The story of Richard Preston's hubris became a legend in the city's business circles. It was a delicious piece of gossip, told with schadenfreude in boardrooms and at country club bars. The story of the mighty developer who was so arrogant he threw a victory party for his own defeat, only to be vanquished by the son-in-law he'd spent years belittling. Richard's partners, Henderson and Croft, publicly and messily dissolved their partnership with Preston Holdings. They issued a statement citing a fundamental loss of confidence in leadership and a catastrophic failure of due diligence. Their withdrawal of capital triggered a cascade of failures. Investors, spooked by the public humiliation and the loss of the lucrative waterfront contract, pulled their funding. Lines of credit were called in. Stock in Preston Holdings, once a regional powerhouse, plummeted until it was nearly worthless. Richard, the man who dealt in concrete and steel, found his empire was nothing but a house of cards. He was forced to sell off assets at a fraction of their value just to cover his debts. The sprawling family estate, the one Carol had lorded over Liam for years, went on the market. Mark, who had built his entire identity on the foundation of his father's wealth, was hit the hardest. His cushy executive position at Preston Holdings vanished. He had to sell his sports car and trade his luxury condo for a cramped apartment in a less fashionable part of town. His snide, confident smirk was replaced by the pinched, anxious look of a man who has to check his bank balance before buying groceries. The universe had delivered a proportional response. The man who mocked Liam's modest apartment now lived in one himself. Carol, stripped of her status as a society queen, withered. Her charity galas were canceled. Her friends, who had orbited her for her wealth and influence, suddenly stopped returning her calls. Her world of appearances had been predicated on a reality that no longer existed. And Sarah was adrift. She was caught in the wreckage of her two worlds. Her family, once a source of strength and pride, was now a vortex of bitterness and recrimination. Her father blamed her for bringing Liam into their lives. Her mother blamed her for not being able to manage her husband. At the same time, the man she had dismissed as a mistake was now one of the most celebrated figures in the city. Liam's Phoenix project broke ground to massive fanfare. The mayor himself was at the ceremony, praising Aethelred Designs for its human-centric vision. Liam's face was now the one in the papers, not with a hard hat perched jauntily on his head, but with a look of quiet, focused intensity as he reviewed blueprints with his team. He was hailed as a visionary, a local hero who had beaten out national competition to create something truly special for his city. He handled the newfound fame with the same grace and humility he had always possessed. He poured his energy into the project, ensuring every detail lived up to the promise of his design. He was not just building structures, he was creating jobs, revitalizing a community, and pouring his soul into the city's future. Sarah tried to contact him. In the first few weeks, the calls were frantic, desperate. "Liam, please, we need to talk. This is all a misunderstanding. I love you." He didn't answer. He let the calls go to voicemail, and his lawyer handled all communication. The voicemails then turned angry. "How could you do this to my family? To me? After everything we've been through? You did this out of spite." Then they cycled back to pleading, each message more lost and pathetic than the last. She was a woman who had never had to face real consequences, and she was drowning in them. Liam listened to one of them, then deleted the rest without hearing them. It wasn't that he was without feeling. He felt a profound sadness for the woman she had become, for the love they had lost. But he knew, with unshakable certainty, that there was no going back. Her apologies were born of her own desperation, not of a true understanding of the hurt she had caused. She was sorry for the outcome, not for the actions that led to it. He moved out of their shared apartment and into a minimalist loft in a converted factory downtown, a space that was all clean lines, natural light, and honest materials. It was a space that reflected him. He focused on his work, finding solace and purpose in creation. He wasn't reveling in the Prestons' downfall. In fact, he took no pleasure in it. Their ruin was simply the natural, inevitable consequence of their own choices. It was gravity. What goes up must come down, especially when it is lifted by the hot air of arrogance. He had simply refused to be their safety net any longer. His only action had been to stand in his own truth. The rest had taken care of itself. He was at peace. One evening, months later, Liam stood on a temporary balcony on the 5th floor of the first rising tower of the Phoenix Project. The sun was setting, casting long shadows and painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Below him, the massive construction site was a hive of activity, a symphony of industry and progress. In the distance, the city skyline he was now reshaping glowed against the twilight. He held a letter in his hand. It had come in the mail that day, forwarded from his lawyer's office. The envelope was simple, the handwriting instantly recognizable as Sarah's. He had almost thrown it away, but something had stopped him. He opened it. The letter was different from the desperate voicemails. The tone was not pleading or angry, but quiet, reflective, and deeply sad. "Liam," it began, "I am not writing this to ask you to come back. I am not writing to ask for your forgiveness because I know I haven't earned it. I am writing because I need to say the things I was too blind and too cowardly to say before. You were right about everything. I didn't believe in you because I was a coward. I was more afraid of my father's disapproval than I was committed to your happiness. I measured your worth by his ruler, and that was my greatest failing. I saw your quietness not as strength, but as weakness. I saw your integrity not as a virtue, but as a lack of ambition. I was wrong, so deeply, fundamentally wrong. That night at the restaurant when Alistair Finch walked in and spoke to you, I saw you for the first time, the real you, the man who had been there all along, whom I had refused to see. And in that same moment, I saw my father for the first time too, not as a titan, but as a small, hollow man, terrified of being seen as anything less than powerful. I called you the mistake I settled for. The terrible irony is that you were the one genuine, solid, and real thing in my life. I was the one who was the mistake. I settled for a world of shallow appearances and conditional love, and in doing so, I threw away the one person who offered me something true. I don't know what my future looks like. My family is broken. But for the first time, I feel like I am seeing the world with clear eyes. The view is devastating, but it's real. I hope one day I can build something real too. I wish you nothing but happiness, Liam. You deserve it. You built it. Sarah. Liam folded the letter slowly and slipped it back into the envelope. There was no anger left, no bitterness, only a quiet, melancholic closure. It was the apology he had needed to hear, not because he needed her validation anymore, but because it meant she had finally begun the long, hard work of finding herself. It meant she might, one day, be okay. He looked out at the rising structures around him, at the solid foundations of concrete and steel. He had spent his life studying how to build things that last. He now understood that the same principles applied to a life. You needed a solid foundation of integrity. You needed a structure of honesty. You needed to let in the light. The Prestons had built their world on a foundation of lies and ego, and it had crumbled at the first tremor of truth. He was building his on something more enduring. The central lesson in all of this is as simple as it is profound. True worth is not what the world sees in you, but what you build within yourself. It's not measured in applause or bank accounts, but in the quiet integrity of your choices. Arrogance builds walls, but humility builds bridges. And in the end, the only structures that truly last are the ones built with a foundation of respect. Respect for others, and most importantly, respect for yourself. What do you think? Was Liam's response justified, or did he go too far? We'd love to read your perspective in the comments below. And if this story of vindication and quiet strength resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more content that celebrates the underdog. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, remember to build your own life on solid ground.